Hi guys, welcome back to Paul UK Reefer. Behind me is a full SPS marine coral fish tank that's 5 months in, well on its way to maturity. And I got there with 0 ugly stage, dinos or nuisance hair algae. Don't believe me? I'll show you. Yeah, that was a very clickbaity title, apologies for that, but the reality is the truth. I'm feeling very blessed. I've got to 5 months in with absolutely no problems with this tank when it comes to the cycle, maturity and so on. And this is the first time that's happened after many fish tanks. So what I'm going to do on this video is take you through how I got there. It might have been through one of the things I did, it might have been through all of them, and I did do quite a few things that most people might think is over the top. But the tank's really looking good, and there's a million different videos out there on how to cycle a fish tank. I thought this one would be slightly different in that I'll take you through the actual tank itself, and you can pick perhaps what you thought worked well and what you would do, and hopefully it will help you with whatever you decide to do with your next tank. Okay, so the format of this video, we're gonna run through all the different stages of the tank, starting with the nitrogen cycle and cycling ammonia and nitrate. Then we're going to talk about how we created a biodiversity in the bacteria that are in there, how we avoided ugly stages like dino flagellates, algae blooms, diatoms to a certain extent, and eventually sort of went down the road to stability and maturity. Not quite there yet because we're only 5 months in, but it's looking really good. So quick disclaimer, everything that I tell you here is what I've done. I've bought all of these products myself. I'm not sponsored by anyone. All of this stuff is real, it's worked. So how you choose to apply that in your future tank is completely up to you, and I hope it's helpful. So I've been reefing for about 8 years, and in that time I've had a number of tanks, a couple of which are on this YouTube channel. In this latest build, I wanted to kind of bring together all of the learning that I've had so far to try and make the cycle as smooth as possible without rushing. I've had tanks where I used really dirty live rock and there was just chaos with pests everywhere and really bad algae. And I've also had a tank where, on this channel, I used Reefer 250, where I kept everything so clean I ended up with a massive dino flagellate outbreak, which really put me off. So my plan with this one was to sort of bring that all together. So I'll show you how we started, and we'll start with the ammonia cycle. Okay, so the first part of the journey is getting through the nitrogen cycle. There's lots of videos on this, so I would definitely tell you to look at it. And Dr. Tim's is probably the best of all of them. He does a talk on nitrifying bacteria, which sounds riveting. No, it absolutely is if you like that sort of thing. And basically what we're trying to do is create a diverse culture of nitrifying bacteria in the tank, so that when fish pee or poo goes into the water, or old food starts rotting, that it doesn't poison the fish. And what we do is build up kind of an army, if you like, of bacteria in the tank that can deal with that, and they process it all and create it into a gas that doesn't hurt the fish. Without these bacteria, everything that goes in would cause ammonia to be present in the water, and that would be bad for the fish. It would hurt them, and it's something that we need to avoid at all costs. There's loads of different routes to cycling, and I could probably do a 3-hour video just on that. So what we're going to do is just follow what I did, and again, you can decide if you want to go that same route. So to be able to start a cycle, we need all of our rock and our water in the tank. We need to get the water up to the right salinity, which in this case was 35 parts per thousand, or 1.026 specific gravity. We need to heat it, so we need to make sure our temperature's right. Our normal tank temperature is about 25.5 degrees, but a little known fact is that you can actually increase that temperature during the cycle, and it will mean that the bacteria multiply quicker. So you can actually bring your tank temperature up as long as you do it slowly when you bring it back down again. And I ran my tank at around 29 degrees. And then when the cycle was complete, I started reducing it again. So remember, we've got the right conditions for bacteria to grow now. The first thing to say is turn your lights off. The lights, whilst they look lovely, they are like a battery pack for bacteria that you don't want to grow, and then nuisance algae. So the lights don't affect the fish one bit. They're not bothered whether they're on or off. So the lights at the start, when there's no coral in the tank, are simply there for your own enjoyment. My advice, even though it's frustrating, keep them off until the last possible moment, because the moment you turn them on is when your bacteria that shouldn't be in there or that you're trying to overcome start growing nuisance things like dinos and algae. So keep them off. It does no harm to anything in the tank as long as you're not bringing coral straight in from the start. To seed this tank with bacteria, there's a number of things you can do. You can use bottle bacteria such as Mycobacter XLM, or Dr. Tim's One and Only, or ATI Colony. There's many out there. All of them have different types of bacteria that will start the cycle off and that will put them in the tank. I went down this route, so I used a bit of that. I used a bit of everything. I decided to get a couple of bottles of each. Some people say don't do that. I had no problem whatsoever. Over the space of 2 days, I dumped in tons of different bacteria into the water. I made sure my skimmer was off because I didn't want to bubble out the bacteria, and I also had a fleece roller on the tank which I left open and not filtering because we didn't want to catch all of our bacteria. Same thing applies to a UV. Don't have that on initially. Let the bacteria flow around the tank and colonise, and what that does, it colonises on surfaces. So it will go on the sand, it will go on the rocks, it will go on anything in the sump. Everywhere that is a surface, it will populate, and that's where it grows. So after a couple of days, it will have come out of the water column and it will be planted all around the surfaces. The next thing you need to do is feed this bacteria to make it grow and to make it double, because what will happen is until it's big enough in size to deal with the waste in the tank, you risk ammonia getting in the water. So the next thing we did is feed it, and you can do that by putting a raw prawn in the tank and all sorts of other means, but the cleanest and the most reliable way I found is ammonium chloride, pure ammonium chloride. That's actually Dr. Tim's, so you know it's sort of fish tank application proof. There's no surfactants or anything inside that could damage the water. I put that in, dosed it according to the bottle to take my water volume up to 2 parts per million of ammonia, and then sit back. You've got the bacteria in the tank, you've got the conditions for growth, and now you've got food, as in ammonium chloride, for that bacteria to chomp through, which will mean that they duplicate to try and handle it. The next thing you can have, or the next thing you need to do is, and what I do, is test every single day. If you get a really good picture of your ammonia cycle, if you test it every single day, it's a new tank, you've got nothing better to do anyway because you're waiting for it to cycle. Look at your journey every single day of the bacteria that are in the tank. And you can do that quite simply. You don't need fancy test kits for that. The API Master Test Saltwater Kit is basic as hell. It's not very accurate, but it really doesn't matter in this application because we're looking for presence or absence. We're not looking for the amount. It doesn't really matter. We don't want any ammonia to be in the tank eventually. We don't want any nitrite to be in the tank, and we want it to solely just be nitrate. There are 3 markers as we go through the cycle. Now this can take a few weeks to 6 weeks in a slow tank, or a couple of weeks in another one. It really depends on the tank, the amount of filtration you've got in there. So again, just to reiterate, you're looking for contents of ammonia at 2 parts per million. You're then going to watch as that drops off as the bacteria eat it. As it does, the byproduct of that is something called nitrite. Nitrite's still not very good for our fish, and it still will harm them. So we're looking for that to start to rise, and then that will start turning down and dropping off over a matter of days into something called nitrate. Now nitrate, whilst we don't want large levels of it in our aquarium, nitrate is less poisonous to our fish, and actually it's usually in every single tank that goes. So once you see just nitrate, you've been through an element of cycle, and that's where you'd start doing a couple of water changes to bring your nitrate level down, ready for fish to go in. So that's what we did with this. Now another massive extra that I did to help push that along, because all of those ways are kind of artificial, if you like. I ported over some Max Spec bio balls that I'd had in my other fish tank for a few months seeding, and I bought some of the filter media from that tank too. So yes, that did raise the risk of some pests, but the tank that it came from didn't have any. So I thought the risk was low, and I thought that would bring some mature, year-old live rock into the tank in a controlled environment to help even further bring nitrifying bacteria and different strains of nitrifying bacteria into the tank. And then over a number of weeks, I watched that cycle go all the way down to nitrate, did two or three big water changes, and we ended up with 0 nitrite, 0 ammonia, and about 10 to 15 parts per million of nitrate. Fish ready. That's when we started stocking the fish. So it took a few weeks for this cycle to really grip in. During that time, I, after a week or two, turned the ultraviolet on. The UV won't kill any of the bacteria in the tank because it's all, by that point, which sitting on all the surfaces, not loose in the water column. It also helps to keep nuisance algae from forming. So the UV went on after a week or two. The skimmer came on after a week or two because, again, there wasn't huge amounts of waste that I wanted to take out of the tank, so I turned the skimmer level right down, but what I did want is the oxygen. So oxygen in the tank's a really good thing. So get your skimmer on, but turn it right down. You don't want to be bringing out loads of gunk out of the tank. You want the tank to cycle and let that gunk stay in the tank. So don't skim wet or dry, just turn it right down so it's not actually putting anything out, but just banging oxygen through the tank. And then a bit of carbon. After a couple of weeks, I ran some carbon for a few days just to take out if there was any impurities in the tank. I pulled that out as well. That seemed to work all the way along, testing. So at this point, we're now ready for fish, and I started with a couple of fish, a couple of clownfish to name them. The stocking plans were to add a couple of wrasses and also some tangs. Now this is the one part of this whole process where I took my eye off the ball. It's a well-known fact that when you've got a newly cycled tank, you shouldn't stock it very quickly because the amount of bacteria in the tank has to adapt to the bio load that's going on in there. So when fish come in and start peeing and pooing, more bacteria have to generate themselves to be able to handle that new demand. So don't put more than one fish in a week. I said it on the videos. I then found a yellow tang and a hippo tang reasonably cheap and absolutely went against everything I said. That caused ammonia to rise. So what I shouldn't have done is rush that part of the process. So we now got to 2 months with most of our fish inside the tank and no lights on still. So we're still holding out on the lights because we know that the moment we put them on, it's going to start creating all sorts of bacterial changes and changes to all the levels in the tank. So at this point, it's a good point to note the fish choice that I've got. This is another massive reason for the success of this tank. I'm lucky enough to have a big enough tank, which is 425 litres, sort of out of the box, so maybe less when it comes to displacement. But with a tank that size, you're able to put some bigger fish in, and the best fish for eating nuisance algae before it even becomes a problem are tangs and rabbitfish. Now you'll note in this tank, I've got 2 rabbitfish in 2 tanks for that exact reason. They've all got a job. And whilst there's a clownfish that doesn't really do much from that perspective, there's also a wrasse that goes around and eats pests. So all of my fish have jobs. And I think a large reason why no huge algae blooms happen in this tank is because even if they were going to start, the tangs would be on top of them eating and chomping away at it before it even started. So another massive reason for success is definitely your fish choice. In smaller tanks, this is a challenge. There's things like algae blennies and a few other bits and pieces, but you definitely need to beef up and clean up crew that eat algae because there's always going to be some. And there were some signs of it in this tank, but it never really took hold and it never really became a problem. Even the diatoms that happened in this tank, which are something that's stuck inside the sand that sort of comes out over time, that was a tiny little process. There was a bit of browning just for a couple of weeks and then it just went away, but it wasn't even there wasn't even a lot. And I think the diversity of the bacteria that I had in the tank is a massive reason for this. And then secondly, the fish chomping away at it. So they were some big reasons why the success of this tank is what it is. And obviously we're only at 5 months, so I don't want to second guess it, but so far it's pretty spectacular how well we've avoided the things that I've had in the past that have caused me so many issues. Okay, so we made it. We're now 2.5, 3 months in, the lights are on, and everything's looking rosy. At this point, the next thing you need to do to control all of the problems that can arise in a tank, especially a new one, is manage your nutrients. Nutrient control is one of the single most important things you do to keep your water looking good and to keep nuisance algae at bay. And by that I mean phosphate and nitrate. They're the 2 measures in a fish tank of how clean or dirty it is, so to speak. Now, advisable levels of nitrate are around 5 to 10 parts per million. Some people run them a lot lower, but the risk of having 0 could encourage other nuisance algae. So my advice is 5 to 10 parts per million nitrate. It doesn't matter if it's slightly higher, but you may see some algae starting to grow. So 5 to 10 on that. The other thing is phosphate. Phosphate is another big indicator of a dirty tank and also one that's likely to grow algae. So phosphate's measured in much lower levels, and the desirable range for my tank is around 0.05 to 0.1 phosphate. And note where the zeros are in that, 0.05 to 0.1. That's an important level. Again, if that drops to absolute zero, you're likely to encourage dinoflagellates and really bad things into your tank, which happened on my Reefer 250. Feel free to go back and have a look at the state of it. And then too high a phosphate will absolutely encourage growth of algae and mean you have to clean your glass every day and all sorts of undesirable things. But a range between them two, if you can check that, check it minimum weekly. I tend to do it weekly. Sometimes if I'm not sure something looks out of kilter, I'll do it twice a week. So my advice is manage them two levels. Get a good couple of test kits. The ones I use are the Hannah Checker for phosphate, ultra low, and the Dinos nitrate, because it's got a really big range. It goes all the way from 0 up to 120. So if there's any problems, I'll be able to really zero in on it. So yeah, that's the last bit. And from that, and doing sort of weekly water changes to keep all the levels low, and having UVs on, having a filter roller in, the Clarity filter roller to keep the water clean, or filter sucks other people would use. Between all of them measures, we've found a balance of trying to keep the nutrients low, but keep the tank healthy. And that's currently what I'm doing and currently getting the great results. So in a nutshell, that's how I got to this position where I've fully cycled a tank to just about maturity with very minimal problems whatsoever. I hope that's been useful. So we're going to go over some final notes. Add diversity of bacteria. I used 3 or 4 bottles of different bacterial products at the start. I now once a week still dose Nitrobacter 7 a couple of capfuls a week, just to keep constant new strains of bacteria going in the tank. We can do that through liquids, but we can also do that through bio balls and filter media from other tanks if you trust the source. That will make your cycle time come down a lot, and it will mean that your tank's balanced for corals and you start growing things like coralline algae a lot quicker. Test. I can't underestimate that. Every day through the ammonia cycle, why not? Once a week, once every couple of weeks through that middle stage of risk, if you like, from 3 or 4 weeks in to 8 or 10 weeks in. That's the period where your tank can go one way or the other quite quickly if you're not on top of it. Consider UV. I've had it on this tank and I'm not seeing an issue whatsoever. It might have been like that anyway, or it might not have helped, but I believe it's been part of the sort of bigger picture that really helped with the tank. Get fish with jobs, get tangs, get algae bunnies, get things that are going to eat the crap you don't want in your tank. That's a big one. And don't underestimate sort of bringing it in on frags. So once you start putting corals in your tank, every coral frag you bring in has got somebody else's bacteria all over it. So whilst you dip them to get rid of any pests, some of them have coralline algae, some of them have sort of other bacteria from established tanks. So don't underestimate that. Get a few tester frags in the moment your tank feels good and it feels stable. Obviously throughout the cycle, the only thing that I would say is just keep an eye on your alkalinity, because at the start, the tank can use alkalinity when it's cycling. So you want to keep that up at around 8. So just get an alkalinity test kit. There's hundreds out there, and keep an eye on it. It's not a massive factor until you start growing sort of harder to keep corals, but a well-balanced alkalinity even at the start will absolutely give you dividends at the end. So they're all my tips. I hope that was helpful. It may be overkill. Probably quite a few people have said I've thrown the kitchen sink at it, but the results stand for themselves. Really proud of it. I'll give you a quick look at the tank now on the way out, but thanks for watching. Please like and subscribe. Ask any questions if you like. I'm always happy to try and help fellow reefers. I've had a lot of help through YouTube myself, so thanks to everyone, and see you soon.